I'm Gail Hammond, and I'm really glad to see all of you. I wanted to let everyone know that our programs are filmed by PAC-B TV. This is Mac in the back, who's doing tonight's program. And you can view them on YouTube. So Steve McCann, would you explain how you do it?
Sure. We're filming all of our presentations now. The way you can view them is you go to YouTube, search for PAC-B TV. It has its own channel. It's the local access TV station in Harleysville. They have different playlists for different topics like community or government. Go to the history playlist and then just scroll down through and you'll see various history presentations. And it will either say Barb Dix or Schroeppel Historical Society or something like that. And if you have any trouble, just contact us and we can give you better directions. They usually come up, I don't know, typically a week to 10 days after the presentations will be available online.
So we have several on there right now. So a few points that I'd like to just bring out. We've set up a little gift table of sale items in the back if anybody wants to peruse them. There's a price list on there. The other thing is we still have Grips books of Phoenix, New York. They were called Grips because I think that's the company that printed them first in 1902. And they're $25 for the hardcover. They look exactly like the 1902 book did. And the thing is about them is that being that they were done in 1902, before the fire, this was a whole different community at that time. There were mills, factories, stores, stagecoach, all kinds of things going on, and a lot of nice homes and everything. So the book's very interesting. And there's pictures of church groups and school groups and administrators, and there's names on every picture. So it's not just like an unknown picture. So anyway, so we have those, so see one of us if you're interested. The building is, the museum is open on Saturdays from 10 to 1. This coming Saturday will be probably our last Saturday open because the 31st being Memorial Day, State Fair weekend, no one usually is even around. And Barb, you're on duty Saturday, you remember that. I covered the Grips book, sale items. There's membership forms on that little table in the back, and we really could use some new members. We enjoy some people who like to get their hands dirty. I want to thank especially Janet Moyer. Stand up, she had the brilliant idea of taking a day and going up in the loft in the boxes and boxes of stuff up there that nobody's looked at for years, and going through it, cataloging it, et cetera, She's been helped by her husband Lynn and Nancy and Jim Cromback, and your pardon me?
Yeah,
well, I don't know.
yeah.
And like these three lovely ladies up there, she uncovered those dresses, and that actually is a Civil War era maternity dress with a waistline of about this much.
The tan one. The tan.
Yeah, the end one, the greenish brown one. Anyway, so we're going through and we're trying to change exhibits and organize and identify what we have that's documented on a list and get things listed. So it's been very busy, but that's why you see all this sheet coverings here with stuff there. No. Okay. And quickly, upcoming programs. Our programs are the third Tuesday night of every month. The next one will be September 17th. Jim Papaya, an author from Fulton. Some of you may have seen a lot of his books he's written. He's going to do one on the Oswego County Search and Rescue Program. In October, on the 15th, which would be the third Tuesday, Steve McMahon, sitting right here, is going to do Murder at Dead Creek.
Disappearance.
Disappearance at Dead Creek.
The murder is
Okay.
implied.
And then November 23rd ends with our annual craft show, silent auction, and bake sale. And we do these fundraisers throughout the year because heating, air conditioning for the building, repairs. By the way, Jim, I got a whole list of repairs.
Never ending.
Yeah, it's never ending with a building that's this old. So, did I forget anything?
I might add that that day that Janet was going to spend up there started about a month ago.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's not done yet.
It's true. There was just so
I'm thinking I
much.
should now change my address to this one because
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun in a weird kind of way.
All right, so our historian and vice president, Barbara Dix, is going to do the Greenfield murder, which I've never heard of. So, and we have descendants of this Nathan Orlando Greenfield here. And I don't know if you want them to stand up now or after, but
Well, would you Greenfield stand up?
yeah. Yeah.
Phil, I know, is the son of my cousin Ivan Greenfield. And you are,
Jennifer Miller and my daughter Nicole. We started Ancestry. We found Nathan is our second great uncle.
their great-great-grandfather lived in the house of my great-uncle, or my uncle across the street that's no longer there.
I have an old picture of this here with a really old, like one of the first cars. I was gonna bring the pictures and I forgot about it.
Every picture we took down here had this building in the background because we'd take the kids on the sidewalk and here was this building across the street. I'm so glad that you folks are here. And I wanted to say too that the reason that it took so long for everybody to get up there and get the stuff out of there is that we have the worst stairways in the world, the stairway in the world back here. The treads are about this long and the risers are about this high, and it's awfully hard to get yourself up, let alone boxes of things. So I say great thanks to you guys. Yeah, more than that, your balance too. I guess I'll start out sort of connecting our family here. The house that was across the street was behind where the gas station is there now. It stood on the banks of quite a drop that goes down to the next street below. And the back porch of that house just looked right out over the street below. You didn't want to fall off the porch. And Henry D. Greenfield, who lived there in that house. In fact, I think he owned it. I don't think my uncle did. I think his father did. He was the youngest brother of Nathan Orlando Greenfield, who was the murderer in our murder. And so when I would go there to visit my aunt and uncle, I also, while he was alive, saw Henry D. And Henry D. had sort of a reputation around town as being spouting Bible all the time on the street, even talking to himself. He was not considered, I guess he was considered as eccentric, the eccentric man in town. And I think probably his wife lived there also with him, but she was dead by the time I knew him. And so my connection with him was my uncle by marriage lived there with his father, who was Henry D. My husband also had a connection to the Greenfield family. My son, who's back here now, has 2 connections. They were both by marriage. We were not in any way related by blood, but we were related by marriage. And his grandfather's sister was married to Ernest Greenfield, who owned the house that I live in now and have lived in for 65 years. And he was another one of the Greenfields from up there in Orwell, Richland. Okay, I first wrote about this for a newspaper about maybe 12 years ago. And so I had to go back and find those articles and then try to find all the research that I'd gone through. So I really had to put it down in writing, and I apologize for sort of reading a lot of it because I couldn't remember. There's so many names and everything, I couldn't remember it all in my mind. So, and I'm an old lady, so. Okay, Nathan Orlando Greenfield was accused of killing his wife, Alice Bloodgood Greenfield. It says here aged 18, but she was really 23. I think. I'm not sure. I've seen both ages. In their home in Orwell on October 21st, 1875. Nathan's father, Richard G. Greenfield, was a well-to-do farmer whose family had always been looked upon as good and honest people. Nathan had taught Sunday school in the Methodist Church. They were good Methodists up there. Alice was just 15 when she married 5 years younger than she married, 5 years younger than her husband. She was said to have been a favorite of the local singing school. I didn't know there was one up there, did you? And sewing machine circles. At the time of her death, she had 2 children, had earlier lost a third, and was pregnant. After years of living in New Jersey, Alice G's father, Albert D. Bloodgood, returned to Oswego during the trial and visited with an old friend who asked him if he had come to attend the Greenfield murder trial. Mr. Bloodgood replied he knew nothing of it and was greatly surprised to hear what transpired with his daughter over 3.5 years ago. That was something I just ran into today, and I know nothing about her father, but that's kind of a startling thing to hear. The house they lived in was 3 miles east of the village of Orwell on the Voria Road, and Richard G. Greenfield lived across the road. I have G in here for Greenfield because I didn't want to type it every time. And I went up there years ago with a cousin of mine, and there's a description someplace about where the house was, and we found it, I think, and there's a picture online in one of the articles about this that shows the Voria Road, and it really looks just like that today. There's nothing there. I couldn't even find a cellar hole, but it was in the late spring or early spring when I went up there. So I always was going to go up again when there wasn't any snow on the ground to see if there was any sort of a cellar hole up there, but I've never done that. Gossip played quite a role in this case. Greenfield's mother, so the gossip went, influenced him to distrust his wife. His mother doesn't come off too well in a lot of this. In fact, she was in jail with him at one point. She was. This is how the Buffalo News described the scene of the murder. The body had not been disturbed, and although many of the men who gathered about it had been in the army and seen death in every form, the sight chilled them. On the floor was a dead wife with nothing on but her nightdress, her throat cut from ear to ear, the jugular and windpipe both being severed, and the upper part of her head, this is the part that got me, the upper part of her head near the crown pounded to a jelly. However, all they found was a hickory walking stick. I don't think that would have done that to her head, really, although hickory is hard. There were contusions on the skin about the neck and breasts and everything to denote that the woman had not died without a struggle. On the floor, not far from the body, was found a hickory stick covered with clotted blood and hair, and blood was to be seen spattered on the wall. In the pantry was found an ordinary jackknife, and the large blade, and on the large blade were spots of congealed blood. I don't know why this article said congealed. I don't get the meaning of that necessarily. But it just seemed to have been a terrible sight for everybody to see, and an awful way for a young woman to die. Greenfield's hands were subsequently examined under a microscope with traces of blood under his fingernails. But you understand what a microscope meant in 1875. Didn't mean the same thing it means today. They could look in it, but they couldn't tell what they were looking at, probably. He attributed it to an accident while helping his brother earlier. The Times wrote 2 days later, on October 23, 1875, that the coroner's jury, after a session of 10 hours, rendered the verdict that Alice Greenfield came to her death from wounds inflicted by some sharp instrument in the hands of some person, to the injury unknown, but the evidence taken, the jury believes it to be her husband, Orlando Greenfield. The coroner issued a warrant for Orlando Greenfield's arrest, and after he was arrested, he was placed in the jail at Pulaski, where he gave the testimony according to the Watertown Times. On Wednesday, this is his testimony. On Wednesday, he had been threshing grain all day away from home. During the day, he heard that how did he hear it? They don't tell you that. During the day, he heard that his wife would that night leave him and his house forever. After dusk, he went home, and from his own house to that of his father. He went home. What did he do when he got home? Did he beat her up then? Did he yell at her? What did he do? He just went home, is all this things told me. Directly to his father's directly opposite, telling the folks that someone was coming for his wife that night and he was going to watch. He watched, and during the night saw a light on in his house. He went to the house of William Grinnell nearby, and that's sometimes spelled one way and sometimes another. I think it's Grinnell, and sometimes it has an E on the end and sometimes it doesn't, so it probably has a French origin. Nearby, and telling him that there was someone at his house, asking Grinnell to go over there with him. They went together. And do you Greenfields know, was Grinnell a cousin?
That I don't know.
I think I read someplace that he was. They're all related. Greenfield was loth to enter. Loth means reluctant, saying that he was afraid of being killed. Finally, they entered, and going into the bedroom in the dark, stumbled against something. When Greenfield exclaimed, "My God, Alice is dead." Greenfield testified that he went to his house between 11 and 12 o'clock that night and sat upon the edge of his wife's bed and talked with her. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when he and Grinnell went there and found his wife dead. Greenfield retained former Judge Sylvanus Converse Huntington. Now, Huntington was well known. He was from Pulaski. He was living in retired to Pulaski by that time. He'd been a lawyer, he'd been a district attorney, he'd been a judge, and he was now retired. But he was well known in the whole of the county and was sort of revered as a very good lawyer and very smart man. Described as a brilliant lawyer, educated at Dartmouth, who had lived in Pulaski and once served as a Oswego County district attorney. In October of 1875, shortly after the murder, Judge Huntington put out a warrant against Royal and Alden Kellogg. They were brothers, charging them with the murder of Alice Greenfield. And we haven't even heard their name before. The brothers were soon held before the two justices of the peace in Pulaski. Huntington had found a gun, which he claimed belonged to his defendant, Orlando Greenfield, which Greenfield had said was stolen from his house and discovered missing when his wife's body was found. The defense's theory was that whoever stole the gun was connected with the murder. One story that I read said that before he said, well, I guess it was after he said, "My God, Alice is dead," he'd stumble over her. He looked, and his gun had always been up on the wall, and it wasn't there, so he said, "And my gun's gone." The brothers were eventually let go, but it wouldn't be the last time they were mentioned in the case, and the disappearance of the gun remained a mystery through the first two trials, though later explained in a convoluted plot to show Greenfield's innocence. And that's something that's it's kind of unbelievable. The New York Herald published in June 1879, and they said that the New York Herald published less gossip and more truth than the Watertown or the Buffalo newspaper or the Syracuse newspapers. That, you know, they were closer by, they talked to the neighbors, and the neighbors said, "Oh, this happened and that." The Herald got just purely the facts. They didn't talk to any gossips. That was the story anyhow. The first trial began in the city of Oswego, May 25th, 1876, before Judge Knoxon of the Supreme Court. The prosecution was conducted by District Attorney Lamory and the defense ex-Judge Huntington. And while there was nothing but good to say about Huntington, I have read a lot of things that were kind of questionable about Lamory. He apparently he liked to get the right verdict and was willing to do a lot of things to get it. That was kind of the inference I got from the things I read. And they called a panel of 232 jurymen and had to call 109 of them before they could begin getting one person to be on the jury. There was so much publicity. It was really very hard to get 5 people or 12 people that could say they didn't think they knew everything about it. The case went before the jury June 21st at 9:30 at night. On the following Monday morning, the jury came into court and announced their inability to agree on a verdict. It was generally understood that of the 12, 9 were for conviction of murder in the first degree and 3 were for acquittal. The disagreement was a subject of universal surprise in Oswego County. The prosecution was unhappy with the outcome and again brought Greenfield to trial on February 7th, 1876 in Oswego. Now this is his second trial. He's been, they couldn't acquit, he was acquitted in the first one. By this time, the murder case was widely known, so finding 12 jurors was even more difficult. According to the papers, the testimony was substantially the same as the first trial. Shortly after the start of the trial, the Jamestown Journal, now this was funny to me, Jamestown, way out in western New York. The Jamestown Journal reported on February 18th that Mrs. Betsy Ann Greenfield, mother of Orlando Greenfield, was arrested at her home in Orwell the previous week and placed in the Pulaski jail for having, along with her son Orlando, murdered her daughter-in-law Alice Greenfield. We don't know how long she was in jail, but she testified at some point. It seems kind of crazy. The trial ended up being delayed until May, and sometime after, the defense brought forth new evidence that was deemed questionable by some. On May 11th, 1877, now this started in 75, now we're up to 77, Under Sheriff Doyle received an anonymous letter with a postmark from Grand Rapids, Michigan. The letter claimed to be from Alice Greenfield's killer, who killed Alice after satisfying his lust upon her and declaring that Orlando was innocent of the crime, according to the Watertown Daily Times article from October 1877. Less than a week later, Judge Huntington obtained from Mrs. Hopkins another letter she herself received from Mrs. Alden Kellogg, written by Royal Kellogg to Eldon Kellogg, dated Lafayette, August 21st, 1876. This was not a new letter, it was an old letter. The postscript read, "Tell me about the murder. If you think it all right, tell them I am in Lafayette, and if they want me, they can come and get me." And it's really bad spelling and bad grammar. The letters were determined to be written by Royal Kellogg. We've heard those names before. The district attorney believed both letters to be forgeries to influence the case, but the defense contested. The Kellogg's were arrested on the ground of their presence in the Greenfield house on the night of the murder. And I don't know how that came in, because I don't recall telling you that they were at her house the night of the murder, but the disappearance of Royal, these letters, and the finding of the gun in the possession of them or some of their friends. The jury consulted, and after 2.5 hours concluded that Orlando Greenfield was guilty of the murder in the first degree. The sentence of the court is that you be taken hence to Oswego County Jail, where you be securely confined until Friday the 11th of May next, and that upon that day, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., either in the jail or in the yard adjacent thereto, you be hung by the neck until you are dead, and may God have mercy on your soul. And this business of him right then saying that he's going to be hanged and right there at the jail. Later on, in the Onondaga County trial, the story went that he couldn't be hanged in Oswego County because Oswego County didn't have a gallows. However, to my knowledge, when I first started for the county, I talked to the sheriff, and there still was a gallows someplace there in the county. So that really wasn't true. And again, the story that I heard, and I think this was from John Anderson, who was also researching the Greenfield murder from Onondaga County, that the sheriff was a pretty strong man in Onondaga County, and he wanted to have that hanging there. And so he said, "You're not going to have it there, we're going to have it here." And so the excuse was that we didn't have a gallows here, but we did have a gallows. After 2 stays of execution, the case was carried to the Court of Appeals, which reversed the lower court's decision and granted a new trial. It is believed this exception had to do with the perceived bias, as the Watertown Daily Times printed, with the amount of press the case had received and delays in the trial. Judge Huntington had heard comments from time to time upon the case, which produced a bias and prejudice to the public mind while held in Oswego. It was motioned to have the trial moved to another county, many presuming it would be Jefferson County, with Watertown being near the homes of the witnesses. The Supreme Court ultimately designated the new trial to take place in Syracuse. Again, Syracuse is stronger than Jefferson County. And so that's where it was held, the third trial. When the new trial began, Orlando Greenfield's testimony changed from previous ones. This time he claimed that just before the murder was discovered, he saw a neighbor, George Hines, H-I-N-D-S, Hines, enter there and believed he committed the murder. This was totally new. He hadn't been mentioned before. According to the New York Herald, the prosecution had shown the murderer had placed a hand on the door while it was covered in the victim's blood, leaving an imprint of 4 fingers and a thumb from the right hand. However, Hines was shown to have no thumb on that hand, discrediting Greenfield's story. So many ins and outs in this whole thing. On October 18, 1879, Orlando Greenfield was found guilty yet again and sentenced to be hung on December 12th. Another stay was granted until January 30th, during which time a rather curious article was printed in the Watertown Daily Times on December 13th with supernatural overtones. The Buffalo Express says, A day or two ago, at Richland Station, Oswego County, Mrs. Markey, a dealer of sorceries and familiar with all the ghosts on the calendar, told a Watertown reporter that she had often talked with Alice Greenfield, and she always said Orlando killed her. In the teeth of this direct testimony with the murdered person herself, Governor Robinson yesterday had the assurance to reprieve this wicked Orlando, whom Judge Daniels had sentenced to be hanged on Friday. What can Governor Robinson mean? Does he know better than Alice herself who killed her? Newly elected Governor Alonzo B. Cornell granted another stay until February 27th. Can you imagine sitting in jail like that? And I never did know in the first 2 years before the first trial whether he was in jail that whole time. He may have been in jail for 10 years, who knows? A lot of these things are not clear. I don't have the answers for. Certainly, this is the most celebrated case on record and one that we will hope will end soon. The date would become August 5th, 1881, when Orlando Greenfield was finally hanged before hundreds of witnesses. At 10:48 a.m., he stepped on the gallows. And I'm told that Henry D., who was his youngest brother, and your great-grandfather, that he was taken to see him the morning of the hanging, and that he wanted to stand beside him when he was hung. And they didn't let him do it, but he wanted to. And I always thought of him as a little kid, but he was about 21, I think, actually, when this happened. For some reason, because he was the youngest brother, I thought he was younger than he really was, but. By 10:55, the chaplain finished his prayer, and Under Sheriff Bennett tied Greenfield's legs. Asked if he had anything else to say, Greenfield, who maintained hope until the final hour and continually professed his influence, coolly replied no. The Buffalo News detailed what happened next. The drop fell at 10:58. The body rose 15.5 inches from the floor. A minute later, the legs and arms twitched violently, following by continued trembling of the whole body. This was all in the paper. The neck was not broken. Greenfield hung 13 minutes and was then declared dead. An interesting footnote on the findthegrave.com pages for both Alice and Orlando Greenfield. It is said that Charles Grinnell later admitted to the murder, but no information could be found to corroborate this. Wow. And I went on Find a Grave to see if I could find it quick today, and I couldn't. As for Judge Harrington, this piece of interesting information regarding the Alice Greenfield murder trial was found on New Horizons Genealogical Services. Judge Huntington's belief in Greenfield's innocence became to him a certainty when, as stated by Judge Churchill at the meeting for the Oswego County Bar in April 1894, Greenfield, before the third trial, refused to plead guilty to murder in the second degree because by so doing he would admit that he killed his wife, and the feeling that a great wrong had been done contributed so much to Judge Huntington's sorrow at the final execution of the sentence as did the failure of the labor of years. One of the results of Judge Huntington's labors was that Chapter 182 of the laws of 1876, which provided that persons jointly indicted for crime could testify for each other, thus making Greenfield's mother a competent witness for him. Judge Churchill was also a very well-known and prominent judge in Oswego County, and he apparently told this at this Oswego County Bar meeting in 1894. And there has to be some reason why Huntington thought that he was absolutely, he seemed to be absolutely certain that Nathan had not done had not killed his wife. And he worked with them right up until the very end and followed the whole thing and stood by him. It makes you wonder. I've always felt that it wasn't a certainty that he did it. There were too many other people around, too many other people involved. And
Did they ever say why he would do it? What was going on that made it?
she was seeing, supposedly, she was seeing other people. And I read that Bloodgood, her father, had been a soldier in 1812 at Sackett's Harbor, and he'd married a washerwoman. Now, there were just men at Sackett's Harbor, and that was where the big battle was during the War of 1812. And they sent lots of people up from New York City to do the washing and do all the work that had to be done so the soldiers could soldier. And so there were washerwomen that were sent up there from New York City. And supposedly, Bloodgood married one of these washerwomen. And she probably wasn't a very nice woman. This is what they seem to be saying. She probably wasn't a very nice woman. And so probably this daughter took after her mother. I mean, gossip. Who knows how much of this whole thing was true. But, and his mother was egging him on, apparently, according to gossip again. She tried to set him against his wife.
Never trust your mother-in-law.
That's right. My daughter-in-law will tell you. That's right. This is kind of shorter than I thought it was going to be. Reading it doesn't take as long as just telling a story. But do you have some other things that you want to add to it or discuss, you Greenfields or anybody else?
I have a question about the gun. She wasn't killed with the gun?
No, she wasn't.
Right.
And later on, I didn't include this, but somehow or other there was a bigger knife involved, and they didn't find it when they first went through the house or anything. But somehow later on in the questioning of Nathan Orlando, he went into another room and he had a wrapped, longer knife that he took out. It said it had a slightly curved, which doesn't seem like something that you'd stab anybody with if it's slightly curved. But there was another knife involved. But no, she wasn't shot. But the gun disappeared, and there were all sorts of, I didn't tell you all the different stories. People made up stories. I think they were made up, maybe they weren't. But there was a story about Huntington getting these letters written from Royal and Alden Kellogg from out in the West. He had Henry D. Practice writing like one of the Kellogg's so that he could write these awful letters and they could send them out there and have them sent. It all just seems so strange to me that I myself, in what I know about Huntington, cannot see him involved in trying to prove a case that way. It just seems to me he's a smart enough man. He doesn't have to do something so underhanded as that. Yeah.
Where are they buried?
She's buried. Where is she buried? You guys know?
I don't know where she's buried.
It's a little place up there.
He was taken back by his family.
And buried in the orchard out in back. Yes. And whether then there was another thing I read. His father accompanied his body back to the farm, and there was a funeral. And I don't know if it was that day. It seemed like in the thing that I was reading that it was that day. And they described his father as being not well dressed and old, very old, and a broken man, actually, is what they were saying. And that he never shed a tear. And this was another thing. The lawyers kept saying, Nathan, he never shed a tear. He never mourned her because he didn't shed a tear. His father didn't shed a tear at his funeral. there are some of us who are like that all the time. My family would tell you I'm one. You just don't let on what you're feeling sometimes. And this was one thing that different ones held against Orlo, that he didn't shed a tear over his wife's death. But maybe he just didn't, because his father didn't later on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The family members, I'm just curious, I know it was a lot of years ago, but were there any stories ever told down through the family, or is
No,
it too long ago?
it would be on my mother's side of the family, my grandfather, and nobody ever mentioned anything about him. But he would have been, Nathan would have been my second great-grandfather. So I don't know.
And I forgot your name.
Jennifer?
Bill?
Yeah,
Yeah, me. How about you?
yeah, no, there was a discussion with my father, there was another book,
Samson's?
Samson.
Yeah.
In that book, there's a chapter about the Greenfield murder.
Yes, there is.
And it talks about this letter to, I guess, the sheriff.
Yes.
I'm curious about that. Is that evidence still around?
I don't know.
It has to be in the possession of...
I'll tell you probably not, because when I was working down there, I was records manager. And I asked the DA to look through all of the stuff that he had, because it was piled up in the cellar in bankers' boxes, and they were collapsing on one another. And I said, I want you to go down and look there and see what you need to keep and what you don't need to keep. We've got to get that moved. And it was before we had the record center. And so he let interns go down and do it, and they threw out a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have thrown. Well, it may not be that they shouldn't have thrown it out. They were using the thing that said you can throw out this, you don't need to throw out that. But there are some things that they should give to the historian, let the historian decide, or let the department itself decide whether it wants to keep it or not. You don't just throw it out because the time has gone by. And so, and then the sheriff's stuff was over in the old jail, which collapsed around it. And I think now they have salvaged some. Well, just before I left, they wanted me to come over and look and see and it was moldy, it was being dripped on, it was in terrible shape. And I had tried to tell him that before then, but he wasn't interested in hearing it at that time. But all of a sudden, it became important to him for some reason. And I said, I don't know what I can do. I'm leaving. I don't know what I can do. And finally, I think the sheriff's department did salvage what they could salvage. But it's not in any way that you can research anything, as far as I know.
I
It's...
guess the other question I had, sorry, was this tied to the Michigan
Yeah.
source of these letters. Who was out there?
The Kellogg's, the mother of the Kellogg's lived out there, and so did an aunt. And that's where supposedly they went, well, when they fled. There were 3 guys, the 2 Kellogg's, maybe in Grinnell, Charlie Grinnell, who fled to Michigan the day after she was murdered. And there was one point, I think, where I read where Nathan Orlando said that he was sure Charlie Grinnell had done it. And I'm sure that Grinnell was his cousin. But nothing ever came of it. Nothing ever.
To me, that there was a sense of jealousy or just hatred or something, because her head's beaten to a pulp with a cane, and her neck is sliced. Now, probably either one of these things would have killed her, so why go through and keep torturing the body? So whether it was her husband being jealous, or whether it was another boyfriend that
Well, one of the stories was that the 3 of them had gone there and had assaulted her that night. the two Kellogg boys and the Grinnell.
Did they ever go after them?
What?
Sexually assaulted?
Yes, yes. And that they were seen running away. And then they were gone the next day.
And no one ever pursued them?
Not closely enough.
Wow.
But it's odd to me that he was there at the house till midnight, supposedly.
Between 11 and 12. Between 11 and 12, he stopped. That whole story, I couldn't make anything of either. He'd been working in the field. He went home. He went to his father's. It didn't say what happened when he went home, but he told his father that he'd been told that she was going to run away and leave him that night. It just seemed like there was so much that didn't add up. And things didn't travel very fast, you know, and so things got built on, I think, and built on and built on, and stories got bigger and bigger. And
I don't think it ever got dark at 11 o'clock when you were coming home from the fields.
well, in October?
Yeah, it gets dark at what, 4 o'clock?
Oh, yeah, that's, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's right, me too, yeah. Yeah, where had he been between the time he quit work and,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah.
But like you said that she had had a couple of kids and was pregnant again at the time. Where were the kids? Were they in the house?
Yeah.
when he was murdered?
Yeah, they were right there.
Were they interviewed or?
The little one, I think, was 3.5, and the baby was 18 months. And the little one was on a couch right in the living room. The bedroom was off well, it was like a kitchen living room, great big, great room. And then the bedroom was off of that. And the kid was on a lounge in the living room, they said, and never woke up. You know, that to me is strange. My kids would have woken up.
Well, and I would think if she was being either beaten or that she'd be screaming.
She would make some.
Yeah, she was fighting, yeah.
You mentioned that the first trial he was acquitted, but double jeopardy would have ensued. He would not have been able to be tried again. So
Well,
it was a hung jury.
it was a hung jury, yes. I said
So then
acquitted.
So then the next trial, he was convicted, but it was overturned by court.
Yeah.
And then they tried him again, and then he was found guilty. Seems like it was unusual to try someone 3 times.
Absolutely. This was why it was such a big story, because this just wasn't the usual thing. And it was in papers all over. If you go online and look through the Fulton newspaper thing, you'll find all sorts of stories about this from the New York newspapers. They were up here covering that story. Great big double columns, the whole length of the newspaper.
Why was this particular murder, I can't imagine why this one particular murder up in a little town way up.
Because it went on for so long, I think.
This isn't the only one, too, where we did the bull lives. There were newspapers all
Yeah,
over.
yeah.
Out of state even.
It would come for a murder.
Yeah, they would just grab any kind of gruesome news that they.
Yeah, I did one on murder in Baldwinsville in 1874, and all the major papers were covering it because it was also the era of kind of cheap journalism.
Yeah,
Lots of
yellow.
newspapers competing for sensational stories, and so the more sensational a crime, the better.
They didn't necessarily tell the truth either. That's why you don't know what you're finding in these newspapers.
And that's how it biased the jury, too.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. Yes.
Does anybody know what happened to the little girl?
There was one named
I-
Cora.
What?
There was one daughter named Cora.
I think so.
She got given to, one of the articles I read, she got given to a friend of his.
I can't remember. But when I was working at the county, I had a woman either call me or come in, and she was the granddaughter of Nathan. And she was from Vermont. And I was going to keep in touch with her, but something happened. I didn't. I don't have anything more about her, or don't even know what her name is anymore. But it was certain. Yeah.
Is there more descendants that you could research?
Is there what?
More descendants from him?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because you said there were 3 children, right?
Yeah, mhm.
So,
It seems to me that that second child died early too. And maybe the one girl was the only one that lived very long. But I can't remember. It was hard to find out, yeah.
Yeah, it says on the final grade, it says the second child died in 1945.
Oh,
Where does it say that?
Final grade,
the second child,
yes.
a girl.
Manny Stoudinger.
What was the first name?
Murty. Mertie.
Murty. That
And
doesn't,
then the sister's Cora.
Co-
At 63.
okay, Cora was the older one, and then it must,
Yes, Cora.
so it must be two of them lived and two of them didn't live. Stoudinger is a name from up there. We think of it as a name here, but it's also a name from up there. That's where the Stoudingers came from.
There's two different spellings.
What?
There's two different spellings of that.
I still didn't hear you.
There's two different spellings of the Stoudingers.
Yeah. Almost every name has got a lot of spellings, I'm afraid.
so, Bill, you have a picture of Nathan.
Yes, I do.
And if we could have had it earlier, we could have shown it up on the screen, but would you mind letting, if anybody's interested, he's a very handsome man, wants to look at it after, yeah. He doesn't look like a murderer.
Do you know what a murderer looks like?
How many times is that?
So the daughter there, she is actually buried here in the Phoenix Cemetery.
Is that right?
Yes.
Stoudinger?
Yes.
She must be a Stoudinger from down here. They must have come down here.
Where is she buried? Here. It says Phoenix Rural Cemetery.
In Phoenix.
Doesn't find a grave.
So that's going to be up on the far end of Chestnut Street at the newer cemetery.
Well, the newer one or one across from Gandalf?
No, the newer one, because she died in 1945.
Yeah, the new cemetery, yes, Phoenix Rural. Yeah.
So Henry D. moved from, Henry D. was his brother, but he was living with Richard, or? He was living with,
He was living with Victor.
pardon?
Henry D. was living with Victor,
With Victor.
who was your grandfather.
Right.
I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry. That's not what I wanted to hear.
Yes.
Also, it says in the final grave, it says that she was a member of the Methodist Church, this was the only church.
Yeah.
So she probably came here.
No, well, Methodist is on another street.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Not this church, but
Okay.
Methodist Church here in Phoenix. Yeah.
So Barbara, do you think that the Greensfields men that you remember, and this, say Cora, could have come here with them or visited them and met somebody here? Maybe, and that's why you...
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think it was probably a Stoudinger up there and that they moved down here.
Oh.
Because girls up there didn't,
One time,
what?
didn't the Methodist church burn at one time?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So those records might be gone.
No, the records they're still there.
Oh.
And we have the cemetery records too, so we could go to the to Gordon Tappan and find out where that burial is. You can do that.
We had trouble going to see Gordon.
Did I say Gordon? Doug. Anybody else have any? It certainly is. It's not solved never going to be solved, I don't think. But I have always just felt that there were so many things that were out of place that it wasn't necessarily, I can't see that three,
Slam dunk deal at all.
that he was twice convicted. I can't see where a jury could say that they could vote for conviction.
I don't understand how those men that left after they had been there, why weren't they brought back?
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. I think that Huntington wanted to bring them back, but the state didn't want to.
Wow.
At one time you mentioned something to the effect that she was seeing other men. Was there any testimony or any documented evidence of that? Or
It's
was
all
that just
hearsay.
rumor?
All hearsay and rumor that I know of. There were some articles in the Sandy Creek paper, there were some articles in the Watertown paper, but they were, a lot of it was just from talking to gossips around town, I think. There wasn't anything really based on evidence. And like I said, with the blood tests and the microscope, they just didn't have the ability to do the research that they should have done. There was blood to research there. There was something about the pump at his father's house. He had touched that with a bloody hand or something. There was evidence all over. But so there were people all over, tramping all over this all the time too, in those cases back then. As with the Bolite case, which was even later. That was in the early 1900s. People just went to a murder scene and walked right in.
Even though the records, the original trial records may have been lost in Oswego County, if there was an appeal which led to it being overturned, that would be the state appeals court, and there may be court transcripts from the appeals somewhere at a state level that are available in state archives.
Yeah, the appeals court is in their library is right on the green in Albany, and I've been down there, and I went to find to have the records released from. No, I guess it was a man wanted me to look for an appeal for him, and I went down there and I looked for it and I found it, and we found what he wanted to know. But I had tried to get an appeal or get a case open about a woman who was originally from Mexico, and she had become very famous as a model, very young model, in the early part of the century. And she, later on, her mother had to send her up to Ogdensburg, and she spent the rest of her life there until she was 104. And they will not release those records from Ogdensburg even today.
Really?
I tried to get a judge to do it, and he said, I can't.
Wow.
And she was dead. She was dead when I went after them.
Was that Audrey Munson?
Yeah. Yeah. That's another story. Well, I guess. You've been so
amazed we have family descendants here.
Isn't that wonderful? She's been here before. I remember when you came before. You've been such a great audience, and so many people that I know and so many people that I don't know.
And a great speaker.
Thank you.